The Corvathi Military Academy stood on the dark side of Tessara Prime, a moon that orbited a gas giant so massive it blocked out half the sky. The academy buildings were carved from black stone and stretched across the crater like the bones of some ancient beast. For 300 years, warriors from across the galaxy had come to this place to learn the art of combat, and for 300 years, Commander Vetheron had been their teacher. Vetheron was a Zaraki, a species known for their 4 powerful arms and scales that shone like polished obsidian. He had fought in wars that most species had already forgotten. He had trained generals, assassins, bodyguards, and kings. He believed with absolute certainty that he had seen everything the galaxy could possibly offer. On this particular morning, he stood at the great window of the orientation hall and watched the transport ships descend through the thin atmosphere. Each ship carried new recruits from dozens of different worlds. Each recruit believed they were special, believed they were destined for greatness. Vetheron had seen thousands just like them come and go. The first group to exit their ship were the Malakari, massive creatures with skin like gray stone and muscles that could crush starship hull plating. They walked with the confidence of beings who had never lost a fight in their lives. Behind them came the Sindari, thin and graceful with 4 eyes that could see in complete darkness. The Sindari were known as the finest assassins in the galaxy, and they moved like shadows, even in broad daylight. Then came the Krethen, encased in their biological armor that grew from their own bodies. They were living tanks, slow but nearly impossible to kill. After them came a dozen other species that Vetheron recognized instantly. Valori diplomats seeking combat training, Thresh hunters looking to test themselves against other warriors, and a pair of Omnathi twins who communicated through a telepathic bond. And then, at the very end of the line, walking alone with no companions and no escort, came a human. Vetheron's 4 eyes narrowed as he studied her. She was female, average height for her species, with dark hair pulled back from her face, and skin that showed the marks of sun and wind. She wore simple gray traveling clothes, with no insignia, no medals, no academy sponsorship medallion. The only thing she carried was a long bundle wrapped in cloth on her back. Humans were rare at the academy. Most species considered them too fragile for serious combat training. Their bones broke too easily, their skin tore too quickly, and their lives burned out in less than a century. They were a young species, barely a few hundred years into their expansion across the stars. What could a human possibly learn here that would matter in the brief flicker of their existence? Vetheron made a note on his datapad. Political admission, he wrote. Probably the daughter of some human diplomat who wanted to say their child trained at the famous Corvathi Academy. He would assign her to the beginner classes and keep her away from the serious recruits. There was no point in wasting resources on someone who would wash out within the first month. The orientation ceremony began an hour later in the Great Hall. Vetheron stood on the raised platform at the front and looked out at the assembled recruits. 200 warriors from across the galaxy stared back at him with eager eyes. Well, most of them were eager. The human stood near the back of the room with an expression he could not read. "Welcome to the Corvathi Military Academy," Vetheron announced, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "You have come here because you believe you are warriors. You believe you have skill, strength, and courage. I am here to tell you that you know nothing." He paused to let his words sink in. The Malakari recruits shifted uncomfortably. The Sindari remained perfectly still. The human simply watched. "Over the next cycle, I will break you down and rebuild you," Vetheron continued. "I will teach you combat techniques from 100 different worlds. I will show you how to fight opponents twice your size, and how to defeat enemies you cannot even see. Those of you who survive this training will leave here as true warriors. Those of you who fail will leave here with nothing but the memory of your inadequacy. After the ceremony, the recruits were assigned to their quarters and given their training schedules. Vetheron reviewed the human's file one more time before retiring for the night. Her name was listed simply as Elena, with no family name, no world of origin, and no prior military record. The file was remarkably empty, almost as if someone had deliberately removed information. Curious, Vetheron tried to access the deeper records. A message appeared on his screen that made his scales ripple with surprise. The files were sealed at a clearance level he had never seen before. Not even the Academy's own administrators could access information at that level. Who was this human? Why were her records protected by security protocols that outranked his own authority? Vetheron had trained princes and generals, spies and warlords, and he had never encountered anything like this. He considered reporting the anomaly to the Academy Council, but decided against it. Perhaps there was a simple explanation. Perhaps the human government had made some kind of bureaucratic error. It would not be the first time a species had overclassified a routine personnel file. The next morning, training began. Vetheron watched from the observation deck as the recruits ran their first combat drills. The Malakari powered through every obstacle with brute force. The Sindari moved with fluid grace that seemed to defy physics. The Krethen advanced slowly but steadily, their armor deflecting everything thrown at them. And the human? She performed adequately. Not well, not poorly, just adequately. She completed each drill within the acceptable time limits, but never pushed herself beyond the minimum requirements. When paired against other recruits in sparring matches, she defended herself competently, but never pressed an attack. Vetheron found himself watching her more than the others. Something about her movements bothered him, though he could not identify what. There were moments, brief flashes that lasted less than a second, when she seemed to become someone else entirely. A parry that came too fast to track, a sidestep that anticipated her opponent's attack before it began, a stillness in her eyes that reminded him of ancient warriors he had known long ago. But then the moment would pass, and she would return to being an unremarkable human recruit who barely met the minimum standards. By the end of the first week, the other recruits had already formed their opinions about her. The Malakari called her weak. The Sindari called her boring. The Krethen did not call her anything at all, because they did not consider her worth mentioning. Only Vetheron suspected there was more to this human than she was showing. He did not know how right he was, but he was determined to find out. 3 weeks passed at the Korvathi Military Academy, and Elena remained a mystery that Vetheron could not solve. She attended every class, completed every assignment, and followed every instruction without complaint. She never argued with instructors, never boasted to other recruits, and never drew attention to herself in any way. To anyone watching casually, she was simply another student trying to survive the brutal training regimen. But Vetheron was not watching casually. He had begun keeping detailed notes on her performance, tracking every sparring match and every training exercise. The pattern he discovered made no sense at all. In matches against weaker opponents, she won by narrow margins. In matches against stronger opponents, she lost by narrow margins. The results were too consistent to be coincidence. She was deliberately controlling every outcome. One afternoon, he watched her spar against a Sindari recruit named Kethala. The Sindari was fast, aggressive, and determined to prove herself against the seemingly weak human. Kethala launched a series of strikes that should have overwhelmed any novice fighter. But Elena moved just enough to avoid each attack, never more and never less. Her footwork was minimal, but perfect, placing her exactly where she needed to be, at exactly the right moment. Then something strange happened. Kethala attempted a spinning kick that most recruits would never see coming. But Elena was already moving before the kick began. Sliding to the side, with a motion so smooth, it looked like water flowing around a stone. For just an instant, Vetheron saw her eyes, calm, focused, and completely aware of everything happening around her. The moment passed. Elena allowed the next attack to connect, stumbled backward convincingly, and lost the match by the smallest possible margin. Kethala celebrated her victory, while Elena simply bowed and walked away. Vetheron's 4 hands clenched into fists. She had seen that kick coming before it started. She had moved to counter it with technique that no novice should possess. And then she had deliberately lost the fight. Why? What was she hiding? What was she afraid of revealing? That night Vetheron could not sleep. He spent hours trying to access more information about Elena's background. But every search led to the same sealed files. He contacted colleagues at other military academies, but none of them had ever heard of a human warrior matching her description. He even reached out to human military officials, but they claimed no knowledge of anyone named Elena in their records. It was as if she had appeared from nowhere. Around midnight, unable to rest, Vetheron decided to walk the academy grounds. The training yards were empty at this hour, lit only by the pale glow of the gas giant rising over the horizon. He walked slowly, letting the cold night air clear his thoughts. That was when he heard it, the soft whisper of a blade cutting through air. He followed the sound to the far training yard, the one reserved for advanced students. There, alone in the darkness, stood Elena. She held a practice sword in her hands, and moved through a series of forms that Vetheron had never seen before. Her movements were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Each strike flowed into the next without pause, creating a continuous dance of lethal precision. Her feet traced patterns on the ground that seemed to follow some ancient geometry he did not recognize. Her body twisted and turned in ways that maximized power while minimizing effort. This was not academy training. This was not any style from any world in the Galactic Union. This was something older, something that predated everything Vetheron knew about combat. He stepped forward, his footsteps loud against the stone. Elena stopped immediately, the practice sword freezing in mid-swing. She turned to face him, and for a moment he saw something in her eyes, not fear, but calculation. She was deciding how much he had seen and what to do about it. "What school is that?" Vetheron demanded, his voice harsh in the silence. Elena lowered the practice sword slowly. "An old one," she said quietly. "It does not have a name anymore." "I have studied combat forms from over 200 worlds," Vetheron pressed. "I have never seen anything like what you are doing. Where did you learn it? Who taught you?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. The gas giant's light cast strange shadows across her face, making her expression impossible to read. Finally, she spoke again. "My teacher learned from her teacher," she said, "and her teacher learned from another. The chain goes back a very long time, Commander, longer than you might believe." "That is not an answer." "It is the only answer I can give you." She bowed slightly, the gesture respectful but final, and walked past him toward the dormitory buildings. Vetheron let her go because he did not know what else to do. He had been a warrior and a teacher for 300 years, and he had never felt so completely out of his depth. The next morning, he called a meeting with the Academy Council. He explained what he had observed: Elena's controlled performances, her impossible reactions, the ancient combat forms she practiced in secret. The council listened with growing skepticism. "Perhaps you are seeing things that are not there," suggested High Instructor Malith, a Crethan elder whose armor had turned white with age. "Humans are known for their mediocrity in combat." "What you described sounds like fantasy," Vetheron insisted. "I know what I saw. This human is not what she appears to be. There is something she is hiding, something significant." Then test her, Malith replied. The trial of standing is approaching. If she is truly skilled, she will not be able to hide it in single combat against our best recruits. And if she is merely average, as her records suggest, then you will have your answer. The trial of standing, the brutal tournament that determined each recruit's final ranking. It was the one event where holding back was impossible, because the consequences of losing were too severe. Anyone who failed to perform would be expelled from the academy in disgrace. Vethorin nodded slowly. Yes, the trial would reveal the truth. Whatever Elena was hiding, she would not be able to maintain her disguise when faced with opponents who were actively trying to destroy her. He left the council meeting and found Elena in the dining hall, eating alone, as she always did. She looked up as he approached, her expression polite but guarded. The trial of standing begins in 3 days, he said. I assume you intend to participate? Of course, Commander. Then I suggest you stop holding back, Vetheron warned. The recruits you will face in the trial will not show mercy. If you continue to fight at half strength, you will be seriously injured or worse. Elena met his gaze steadily. Thank you for your concern, Commander. I will keep your advice in mind. She returned to her meal, and Vetheron walked away with more questions than answers. In 3 days, he would finally learn the truth about this mysterious human. He was not prepared for what that truth would be. The morning of the trial of standing arrived with a sky the color of blood. The gas giant had moved into position above the academy, casting everything in shades of deep red and orange. The recruits gathered in the great arena, 200 warriors ready to prove their worth through single combat. The rules of the trial were simple. Each recruit would fight until they could not continue. Victory meant advancement through the tournament brackets. Defeat meant elimination and possible expulsion. There were healers standing by to treat injuries, but serious wounds and even deaths were not uncommon. This was the price of glory at the Korvathi Military Academy. Vetheron stood on the observation platform above the arena, his 4 arms crossed over his chest. Around him sat the other instructors and the Academy Council, all of them eager to see which recruits would rise and which would fall. The atmosphere crackled with tension and anticipation. The first matches began, and the arena filled with the sounds of combat. Malakari warriors crashed against each other like colliding mountains. Sindari assassins danced and struck with blinding speed. Krethan fighters absorbed punishment that would kill lesser beings and kept advancing. By midday, dozens of recruits had been eliminated, carried off the arena floor with broken bones and shattered pride. Elena's name appeared on the tournament bracket for the afternoon session. Her first opponent was a Malakari named Krethvul, one of the largest and most aggressive recruits in the entire class. Krethvul had publicly announced his intention to, as he put it, send the weak mammal home in pieces. The other recruits laughed at his boasts, eager to watch the seemingly helpless human be destroyed. The hour before the match, Elena walked to the armory to retrieve her weapon. Vetheron followed at a distance, his curiosity overwhelming his patience. He watched from the doorway as she removed the wrapped bundle from her back, the same bundle she had carried when she first arrived at the academy. She unwrapped the cloth slowly, carefully, with the reverence of someone handling a sacred object. Inside was a sword unlike anything Vetheron had ever seen. The blade was curved, about 1 meter long, forged from metal so dark it seemed to swallow the light around it. Even from across the room, he could feel something emanating from it. Not heat, not cold, but a presence that made his scales prickle with unease. One of the other recruits in the armory, a Sindare named Velera, glanced at the blade and froze. Her 4 eyes went wide with shock, and her gray skin turned pale. She took a step backward, as if the sword might bite her. "That is void steel," Velera whispered, her voice trembling. That metal has not been forged in 600 years. It is impossible to make any more. The knowledge was lost in the collapse wars. Where did you get that weapon? How can you possibly have that? Elena did not answer. She simply lifted the blade and examined it in the armory's dim light. The surface of the metal was covered in tiny marks, thousands of them etched into the dark steel. From a distance, they looked like scratches or decorations. But Vetheron realized with a start that they were something else entirely. They were words. Before he could move closer to read them, Elena sheathed the sword at her hip and walked toward the arena. Velara remained frozen in place, staring at the empty space where the blade had been. "What is void steel?" Vetheron demanded, approaching the Sindari. Velara turned to him with haunted eyes. "It is a legend, Commander. A metal that was forged during the First Age, before the Galactic Union existed, before most species had even discovered space travel. The technique required temperatures that can only be found in the hearts of dying stars. No one has been able to replicate it for centuries." She paused, her voice dropping even lower. "The stories say that void steel remembers. Every battle it fights, every life it takes, the metal absorbs and holds forever. That is why the old warriors prized it above all other materials. A void steel blade carries the experience of everyone who ever wielded it." Vetheron's hearts began to pound. He turned and ran toward the arena. The match had already begun by the time he reached the observation platform. Krethvol stood at one end of the fighting circle, his massive body tensed and ready to attack. His stone-like skin was cracked in places from previous battles, but his eyes burned with confidence. He had crushed every opponent he faced, and he fully expected to do the same to this small human. Elena stood at the opposite end of the circle, the dark sword held loosely in her hands. She looked calm, almost peaceful, as if she were standing in a garden rather than a combat arena. The crowd of spectators muttered and laughed, already anticipating her defeat. "Begin!" the referee shouted. Krethvol charged. His feet shook the ground with each step, and his massive arms reached out to grab and crush. He moved faster than any creature his size had a right to move, crossing the distance between them in less than 2 seconds. Elena did not retreat. She did not dodge. She simply moved. Her body shifted like smoke in the wind, sliding around Krethvol's grasping hands with impossible grace. The dark sword sang as it cut through the air, a single perfect note that echoed across the silent arena. 1 strike. 2 strikes. 3. Each one landing with surgical precision on joints, tendons, and nerve clusters that should have been protected by Krethvol's stone armor. The Malakari's charge faltered. His legs buckled. He crashed to the ground like a falling mountain, and before he could rise, the edge of the dark blade rested against his throat. 4 seconds. The entire fight had lasted 4 seconds. The arena was completely silent. 200 recruits and a dozen instructors stared at the impossible scene before them. The largest, strongest warrior in the entire class lay helpless on the ground, defeated by a human who had seemed so ordinary just moments before. Vetheron gripped the railing of the observation platform so hard that the metal bent under his fingers. He was not looking at Elena's victory. He was looking at her sword. He was finally close enough to see the etchings on the blade clearly. Vetheron stepped onto the arena floor with shaking legs. All 4 of his arms trembled as he walked toward Elena, who still stood over the fallen Malakari. The other recruits watched in confused silence, unsure why the Academy's most senior instructor had interrupted the tournament. Elena turned to face him as he approached. Her expression was calm but guarded, as if she had been expecting this moment. The dark sword still rested in her hands, its surface drinking in the red light of the gas giant overhead. "May I see the blade?" Vetheron asked, and his voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Elena hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the sword's grip, and for a moment, Vetheron thought she would refuse. But then her shoulders relaxed slightly, and she held the weapon out, not offering it to him, but allowing him to look. He leaned forward and read the etchings on the dark metal. The first words he recognized made his blood run cold. The Siege of Korvath Prime, a war from his own world's history, a battle fought over 200 years ago. His own grandfather had died in that siege, defending the capital city against invaders from the outer systems. Millions had perished before the fighting finally ended. And here it was, recorded on this blade. A human had been there. A human had fought in that war. He kept reading, his eyes moving down the length of the sword. The burning of the Sindari reaches, the 7 Years' Scream, the liberation of the Hollow Worlds. Each name was a war he knew from history, a conflict that had shaped the galaxy. The battles spanned centuries, reaching back further than any single life could possibly extend. Near the hilt, the etchings were older, worn smoother by time and handling. He had to squint to make out the words. The First Contact Wars, the legendary conflicts from when humans first encountered other species in space. The human expansion, their rapid spread across the stars, that had alarmed and confused the established powers. And there, barely visible, the oldest etching of all, the Stand at Sol. The Stand at Sol. That was a battle from before humans had even left their home system. They had fought against raiders who came to enslave their species, and against all odds, they had won. It was one of the foundational myths of human civilization, a story that every human child learned before they could walk. These battles spanned 300 years, Vethorin said, his voice cracking. No single being could have fought in all of them. Not even the longest-lived species in the galaxy could have participated in all these wars. No, Elena agreed quietly. No single being could have. She turned the blade slowly, revealing the other side. There, etched in a column running from the tip to the hilt, was a list of names. Dozens of them, each one followed by a date. Maria Vasquez, 2147. James Chen, 2159. Amara Okonkwo, 2183. The names continued down the blade, generation after generation, century after century, until they reached the newest addition near the grip, Elena Reyes, 2398. The blade remembers, Elena said softly. Even when the galaxy forgets, it passes from hand to hand, mother to daughter, teacher to student, soldier to soldier. Each bearer adds their wars to the record. Each bearer learns everything their predecessors knew. And when they can fight no more, they find someone worthy and pass the blade on. Vetheron's mind reeled. He had lived for 300 years, and in that time, he had trained perhaps a few dozen truly exceptional warriors. But this blade, this weapon, carried the accumulated knowledge of nearly 50 human fighters, each one adding their experience to the whole. "Who are you?" he breathed. "I am the 47th bearer of remembrance," Elena replied, using the blade's name for the first time. "I am the keeper of 300 years of combat experience, the inheritor of lessons learned on 1,000 battlefields." She paused, her eyes meeting his. "I came here to learn what you teach, Commander. I came here because your academy has knowledge that my predecessors never encountered. When I leave, I will add your lessons to what we carry forward." She lowered the blade and looked at the assembled crowd around them. Recruits and instructors alike stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to awe to fear. The Malakari she had defeated still lay on the ground, forgotten by everyone. "That is what humans do," Elena continued, her voice carrying across the silent arena. "We inherit. We adapt. We remember. Our lives are short, too short to master everything on our own. So we build chains of knowledge that stretch across generations. We pass down what we learn, so that those who come after us start from where we ended, not from where we began. Vetheran thought about his own species, who lived for centuries, and learned slowly, accumulating wisdom through personal experience. He thought about the Sindari, whose assassin techniques were closely guarded secrets passed only to blood relatives. He thought about the Malachari, whose warriors valued individual strength above all else. None of them had created anything like this. None of them had built a system where knowledge flowed continuously from one generation to the next, growing stronger with each transfer. "Why did you hide this?" he asked. "Why did you pretend to be ordinary? With what you carry, you could have demanded anything: private instruction, special treatment, respect from every being in this academy." Elena smiled sadly. "Because that is not why I am here, Commander. The blade teaches me to fight, but it cannot teach me everything. There are techniques your academy knows that Remembrance has never encountered. There are strategies and philosophies that humans have not yet learned. If I had announced myself, people would have treated me differently. They would have changed how they taught, what they revealed, how they fought against me. I needed to see everything as it truly is, not as people would perform for an audience." She slid Remembrance back into its sheath. "Every bearer of this blade has walked the same path. We go where knowledge exists, and we absorb it. We hide what we are, because people fear what they do not understand. And then, when we have learned everything we can, we move on and find the next source of wisdom." Vetheran stood in silence for a long moment. Around them, the arena slowly came back to life. Recruits whispered to each other, instructors exchanged glances, and the Academy Council members leaned forward in their seats with intense interest. "And what will you do with all this knowledge?" Vetheran finally asked. "What is the purpose of carrying 300 years of war?" Elena's expression grew serious. "The same purpose it has always served," she said. "When darkness comes to the galaxy, and it always comes, there will be someone ready to stand against it. Someone who carries the lessons of every battle ever fought. Someone who will not repeat the mistakes of the past." She placed her hand on the hilt of Remembrance. "So that when the time comes, we are ready." She bowed to him, a gesture of genuine respect, and walked off the arena floor. Vetheran watched her go with new eyes, seeing not a single human woman, but an unbroken chain of warriors stretching back to the dawn of human history. Word of Elena's true identity spread through the academy like fire through dry grass. By nightfall, every recruit and instructor knew the story of the human woman who carried 300 years of galactic warfare on a single blade. The sealed files were finally opened by order of the Galactic Council itself, confirming everything she had revealed. Elena Reyes was the 47th bearer of Remembrance, heir to a tradition older than most of the civilizations in the known galaxy. The other recruits looked at her differently after that day. Some watched her with fear in their eyes, keeping their distance as if she might strike them down at any moment. Others approached with awkward respect, suddenly eager to befriend the human they had mocked and ignored for weeks. The Malachari, who had boasted about destroying her, now walked the other way whenever she appeared. But Elena herself did not change at all. The morning after her revelation, she appeared in the training yard at the same time as always. She wore the same simple gray clothes and carried Remembrance at her hip, now unconcealed for all to see. When the instructors began their lessons, she stood among the other recruits and listened with the same quiet attention she had shown since her first day. Vetheran watched her from across the yard, still trying to understand. She could demand special treatment. She could insist on private lessons with the most senior masters. With the authority of the Galactic Council acknowledging her status, she could probably take command of the entire academy if she wished. Instead, she stood in line with recruits half her skill level and practiced basic defensive forms. "The Council has offered you quarters in the Master's Wing," he said. You would have access to training halls that normal recruits never see. Advanced weapons, restricted techniques, combat simulations beyond anything in the standard curriculum. Why do you remain here with the beginners? Elena looked up at him with calm eyes. Because beginners learn fundamentals, she replied. And fundamentals are the foundation of everything else. The 46th bearer thought she had mastered the basics. She was wrong. And it cost her 3 months in a healing tank after a battle she should have won easily. Elena shook her head slowly. Pride is a poison, Commander. The moment we believe we have nothing left to learn, we stop growing. And warriors who stop growing eventually stop living. She returned to her practice, repeating a simple blocking technique that any first-year student could perform. But Vetheron noticed the tiny variations she made with each repetition, testing different angles, exploring different timing, searching for weaknesses in a form she had probably practiced 10,000 times before. The weeks that followed changed the academy in ways no one could have predicted. Other recruits began watching Elena with new eyes, studying not just her combat skills, but her attitude. Here was a warrior who had defeated the strongest among them in seconds, yet she still arrived early to every class and asked questions like a curious student. She never boasted, never complained, and never demanded recognition for what she carried. The Sindari recruit named Velara became particularly fascinated. She spent hours talking with Elena about the history recorded on Remembrance, wars that the Sindari had fought in, battles where her own ancestors had crossed paths with the bearers of the blade. Elena answered every question patiently, sharing knowledge that had been collected across centuries. Your predecessors fought against my people during the Reaches campaign, Velara said one evening. We were enemies. Elena nodded. The 12th bearer carried wounds from that war for the rest of her life. But she also learned 3 Sindari techniques that she passed on to the blade. Those techniques have saved human lives many times since then. She smiled slightly. We do not remember our enemies with hatred, Velara. We remember them with respect. Everything they taught us made us stronger. The Sindari fell silent, thinking about an entirely new way to view old conflicts. As the training cycle neared its end, Vetheron found himself spending more time in Elena's presence. He began offering corrections during her practice, small adjustments to footwork, subtle improvements to blade angles, refinements of timing that only centuries of experience could recognize. She accepted every suggestion with genuine gratitude, immediately incorporating his advice into her movements. One night, he found her in the far training yard again, practicing those ancient forms he had seen on the first night. This time, instead of stopping when she noticed him, she continued to move, allowing him to watch. The forms were beautiful. They flowed like water and struck like lightning, combining elements from combat styles that should never have fit together. Vetheron recognized pieces of Zaraki defensive techniques, Sindari evasion patterns, and Krethan power strikes, all woven into something entirely new. Your footwork in the 3rd form is sloppy, he said gruffly, when she finally paused. Your rear leg is too straight. Let me show you how the Zaraki do it. Elena turned to face him, and for a moment she looked surprised. Then a smile spread across her face, the first genuine smile he had seen from her since her arrival. Thank you, Commander, she said. I would be honored to learn. Vetheron picked up a practice blade and stepped onto the yard beside her. For the next 3 hours, he taught her everything he knew about Zaraki defensive stances, techniques that had been developed over millennia of warfare, secrets that he had never shared with any non-Zaraki student. She absorbed every lesson instantly, her body adjusting with each correction until her movements matched his own. When dawn finally arrived, they stood together in the pale light, both breathing heavily from the extended practice session. Vetheron felt something he had not experienced in decades, the joy of teaching a truly worthy student. "When you leave here," he said slowly, "will you remember this?" Elena drew remembrance from its sheath and showed him the blade. Near the newest etchings, a space had been left blank, waiting for the next record to be added. "When the next bearer takes up this sword," she promised, "they will know your name, Commander Vetheron. They will know the Tessara teachings and the Zaraki defensive forms. They will carry your lessons forward into whatever battles await humanity." Her eyes met his. "That is how we honor those who teach us. We make sure their knowledge survives." Vetheron's scales rippled with an emotion he could not name. He had trained warriors for 300 years, but none of his previous students had ever offered him something like this. Not fame or glory, but something far more precious: immortality through knowledge. A legacy that would outlast empires. "Then learn well," he said quietly, "and remember everything." Elena bowed deeply, the gesture carrying more respect than any words could express. Years later, when the next great war erupted across the galaxy, and a human warrior appeared on the front lines carrying a blade of dark metal, the soldiers who fought beside her would wonder how humans kept producing fighters of such impossible skill. They would watch her move through enemies like wind through leaves, executing techniques from species she had never encountered, applying strategies from wars fought before her grandparents were born. They would never think to check the sword. They would never understand that they were not watching one warrior but 50, an unbroken chain of teachers and students, all of them present in that single blade, all of them still fighting through the hands of their inheritor. And somewhere in the etchings, next to 100 other names and battles, the newest mark would gleam in the starlight: the Tessara teachings, Commander Vetheron.